Hello, and welcome to Dystopian Fiction Has Been Moved to Current Affairs. This is episode 39, in which we are going to be talking about Arcadia, which is, I suppose, strictly speaking, Arcadia, because it is Dutch. Um, so, show on first season is on Channel 4. We haven't seen the second season yet, but this is a Belgian and Dutch dystopian drama, and it's pretty complex in terms of the story. But
Yeah,
Marsha's
there's
going
a
to
lot
give
to
us
talk
the
about.
yeah, you can give us the summary of the general vibes of this show. That will probably
Yes.
do.
Okay, so Arcadia is set
Mm,
in a sort of closed off, walled off society, utopian society
mhm,
in quotation marks, um, and which is called Arcadia. And basically, each one of its citizens has been microchipped, allowing them to basically be monitored by the government. And with this microchip, they can be like tracked in terms of location. They can do sort of financial transactions. They can get access or be blocked off from different parts of the city or to different buildings or be like blacklisted or whitelisted. And I guess the main sort of central part of the story is that this chip contains a file that keeps track of each citizen's sort of score. There's like
mm,
a score system, citizen points. So each individual has a score. And this score is based on how a person contributes to society, their education, their occupation, fitness, I guess sort of various crimes they might have committed, sort of
mm,
that kind of stuff. And this score determines what this person is entitled to, such as sort of public services,
mm,
um, like medical care and transport. And we'll sort of get more into that later.
mm.
Scores below 3 mean that a person's benefit to cost ratio, very important part, is
Yeah.
insufficient. And therefore, there's no point hanging on to this person, and they have to be deported from Arcadia into the outside. And this is considered a death sentence among the citizens of Arcadia, as it is deserted and unregulated, a bit of a no man's land. And this is all sort of after, I guess, some sort of like climate collapse.
Mm,
And this is why they've sort of built this utopia. And the story basically follows the Hendricks family, who at the beginning of season one, we discover are committing score fraud, leading to the patriarch of the family being deported from Arcadia.
mm,
He takes responsibility for this. And the Hendricks family is quite an affluent family. So, they sort of start off at the top. And then after this whole scenario, the rest of the family is punished with their points being redacted, causing them to have their standards of living to fall, tearing the family relationships apart. And yeah, we sort of follow each of the, I guess, members of this family, the four daughters
mhm.
and the mother, as sort of we see betrayal and secrecy, and at the end of it all kind of bubbles up in government
Mm.
corruption. And I guess at the end of all that, we kind of lead to the uncovering of the culprit of a terrorist attack on the Dome, which the Dome is like the Dukes of
Mm.
the Dome, I think is something called like that.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
it's yes, something like that.
they
The
like
governing council kind of
Yeah, they like
thing, aren't
govern
they?
Arcadia. And with this terrorist attack, a lot of people lost their lives, lots of children lost their parents, and it was kind of like a big tragedy. And we're kind of, yeah, that's kind of where the culmination of season one leads to. So yes, there were lots of moving parts. So I
There
feel
are,
like
yeah, it has a lot
so
of the
much.
elements of like a sort of like a mystery thriller kind of thing as well. Like you're finding
Yeah,
out like who did what, whatever. But from perhaps our
yeah,
perspective, we're most interested in the idea of kind of what this supposedly fair. We're constantly being told, it's this is a system that makes everything fair in the
yes,
city. Basically, you get things from the city if you contribute to it as a citizen, and then we start to see, well, what happens when that kind of goes wrong. And I was saying that I thought it was really interesting that in some ways this would be an easy story to tell from the perspective of like us feeling, oh, this is really problematic, if we were looking at it from the perspective of people who are kind of like at the bottom of the heap, who were struggling to keep their score. But actually, we are introduced to this family that's right at the top, only to discover that it's the very director of the algorithm who has been
Yes.
manipulating it for the benefit of two of his daughters, or I suppose is
Yes.
one his natural daughter and one is his wife's daughter. Is that?
The family structures in Arcadia is like quite interracial,
Mm,
and also like there's a lot of adopting going on, I think,
mm.
as a result of this dome attack,
Yeah, I
where
think so.
a lot
That's
of
right.
children were left parentless, which is also like a
Mm,
part of the, I think, a sort of fault of the system, is like the children
mm,
that were left without
mm,
guardians ended up
mm.
probably being score falling, no
Well,
education,
exactly,
whatever.
yes, because we can see
Um,
sort of the idea of like the toll of caring for your
yeah,
child has an impact on your own score.
yes, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, so anyway, he's manipulated it for both his natural born daughter and his
yeah.
daughter adopted, the daughter of his
Adopted
wife.
daughter, yeah.
Luz is presented as autistic, I would
Autistic,
say,
yeah, I'd
and
say so.
sort of within an otherwise kind of neurotypical family, she stands out,
Mhm.
but also within kind of like a society that, even more than our society, I think, really regulates the idea of what is normal.
Mhm.
And so when somebody is different, this is a question she keeps asking, about how she fits in.
Yes.
So her score was shifted. On the other hand, we have Hannah, who is outspoken,
Yes. Like
rebellious.
big mouthed, I guess is what they
Yeah,
say in
but
the,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but
And
not
she gets
not a,
punished for that.
exactly, yeah. And it's more like, oh, she wanted to be a doctor, but you had to have a top score to be able to train as a doctor. So she also had her score
Lowered,
manipulated.
yeah.
And I thought that this was interested that like, we might have some sympathy for Peter kind of trying to help his neurodiverse daughter fit in with the structures of a kind of neurotypical society. But
Yeah.
then we question, yeah, but what about like Hannah? Is
Hannah,
that,
yeah.
it sort of becomes I don't know, somehow that seems more wrong, as it were. And so
Yes.
we're immediately presented with this kind of like, why do we care about this family when they're clearly corrupt?
Yeah.
I mean, what did you think about like the kind of like his crime, as it were?
So in they like mentioned in the series that Peter is like the grandson of the man who like invented the whole score system. And I guess it also calls into question a lot of like nepotism.
Mm.
So both Lutz and Peter's wife, Kato,
Yeah,
um,
Kato.
both had government jobs based
Mm.
on the Peter's position. Obviously, Peter's
Mm.
position as like the score master or whatever his
Yeah,
title was,
whatever his
is
title
like
was. Yeah.
also based on like familial connections and his like heritage. For him to then just find out, like generations after this
Mm.
whole system was created by his grandfather or something, that
Mm.
it is flawed. One, I think, obviously for Lutz, who is
Mm.
autistic, and I think it's a very good like illustration to show like how the world is generally set up, not in favor
Mm.
of people who are on the spectrum.
Yeah.
It's a system set up on meritocracy,
Mm.
that like the very top people are able to
Mm.
manipulate for their own favor. We see that like
Yeah.
multiple times throughout the show.
Yeah.
Um,
From like the sort of like downright fraud that kind of like Peter commits, where we know that he's done something to the chips to make the
mhm,
algorithm never drop below an 8 for these two daughters. But then we also see it like both explicitly when, so we get the regulator, who is one of the sort of like overseeing powers, um
mhm.
creepy character,
Yeah.
Lena
Yes.
Harms,
Yeah.
uh, somehow because she's pregnant and therefore has this kind of like, our instincts is perhaps to see like, oh, maternal figure, and then she's like
Mhm.
really
She's actually quite
awful.
ruthless.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
Um,
that's sort of a nice thing. But she kind of seems to manipulate Kato's score in order to get Alex, one of the daughters,
Yeah,
to kind of do her.
blackmail.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we see it there. But then we also see people like what's his name, Yax, the father-in-law to be, Gloria,
Yeah.
Alex's fiance, her father, who is explicitly kind of like a big cat in the pond
Yeah,
of.
yeah. A bit of like a
That's a bit of a mixed
kingpin.
miniature. Yeah,
Yeah. He's like
big cat in the pond. That's what
the
we'll call it.
the
Yeah,
tech, the sort of
yeah,
Silicon Valley of
exactly.
Arcadia, I'd say. He's like a
Yeah,
big tech
yeah.
science
And
guy.
we're constantly presented with the fact that he appears to eat what he wants, even
Yes.
though there's monitoring of like alcohol consumption, sugar intake, things like that, which again has this really interesting sort of thing about merit that somehow you're a worse person if you're. I mean, obviously, you could say medically, well, obesity, for example, is a big contributor to the health costs for a
Yeah.
state and that sort of thing. But then there's also all the
It's
other
like in
complex reasons.
enforced prevent like obviously enforced lifestyle
Yeah,
like restrictions, and obviously
yeah.
it's like towards like medical prevention rather than
Mm.
like prevent the disease before it happens and
Yeah, yeah, but
things like
then it
that.
also feels like it's a sort of like well, the whole thing starts to feel like a personal judgment on people,
Yeah,
doesn't it? That you're
yeah, yeah,
somehow a
yeah.
worse person if occasionally eat sugar or
Mm.
you know.
Like people aren't allowed to indulge, I
Mhm.
guess, like even just like on the level
Yeah.
of like the food that
Or
they
even
eat.
make like personal choice that basically says,
Yeah,
I like eating sugar more than I like being thin and healthy or whatever. Or recognizing, I suppose, at the same time that, some people can like metabolize these things better than others. So,
yeah.
it's
Even if
not,
you don't eat any sugar, you can still
yeah,
be at
yeah,
risk for like different
exactly.
reasons.
Yeah, yeah.
Still, yeah.
So,
So
but yeah, but nonetheless, Yax mysteriously seems to be able to eat cakes when the people around him are picking the raspberries off the top and eating them.
mhm.
So we're sort of led to believe that obviously there's explicit sort of cases of fraud, and then
Mm.
there's the sort of the ones that clearly are going on.
Yeah.
But yet
So
publicly, like everything is all about the sort of fact that this is a really fair system.
mhm.
Which I guess, tells us a lot about meritocracy. I think that there's so many people who still seem to think that getting somewhere on merit is somehow a virtuous and equal way of looking at things. But the
Yeah.
more I read about like what leads to apparently your merit, it's many, many more things than just your hard work and obviously it's a big thing in the American dream that class mobility and anybody can achieve anything, but we get it
Yeah.
in
If they
this
work hard
country as
enough,
well.
yeah.
That's well, somebody works hard and they go to, well, it's like the grammar school argument and things like that, that
Mhm.
this will improve these things, whereas stuff like obviously like your health, your genes, should you be punished for your being less intelligent than other people? um Disability is obviously presented in the show, but also things like, so I've talked a lot before on the show about Michael Sandel. He wrote an excellent book called Tyranny of Merit, basically sort of looking at the idea that if you center your sort of societal structure on saying people kind of like are become more worth something in and of themselves, then it basically loses the arguments in favor of like the common good, and basically sort of saying that you don't have to be worthy in order to be like cared for, have basic standards of living and things like that.
Mhm.
um so yeah, I think that that's as somebody who wrestles with the disability benefit system in this country, you see this, like it becomes very clear very fast, like who is worth things and who is not.
Yeah, yeah.
um
It's like in that like sort of cost benefit like
yeah,
system
exactly,
when
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, that
yeah.
was one of the hardest like things, because obviously like you sort of know that implicitly happens, like like with the organ donors, for example, who gets the organ is going to be based on the candidate that I guess, has the best chances with that organ. But
Yeah.
isn't there like subliminally a sort of sense that, this person will contribute more if they get this organ,
Yeah. 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 In a sense.
potentially?
Yeah.
Um, or even like in a triage situation, again, maybe not explicitly, but implicitly, a doctor might have to make a decision about whether to save the old person or the sort of like, young person or
Yeah.
whatever, because of the amount of life that they can kind of like contribute to. Um, but in Arcadia, the it's much, much more explicit.
Yes.
But I thought a flawed cost benefit analysis. I don't know what you thought about the kid with the potential osteoporosis, brittle bones, whatever, the one who kept breaking his leg.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So we sort of see this like score-based access to like public services in like the medical care scenario. So Hannah, who now is a nurse, for like the
didn't like
duration.
that, the whole kind of
Yeah.
like demotion that a doctor gets
Yeah.
demoted to a nurse. That is a failure to understand the value of nurses. No,
Literally.
sorry.
Yeah. Value of
That
nurses,
aside.
exactly. But also just like, I'm sure there's a doctor, still like a doctor deficit
Okay.
in Arcadia, just as there is probably in most places of the world right now. I don't know why that would have changed
Although in
post-apocalyptically.
Yeah, have you seen this thing? This is a bit of an aside, but about medical graduates and the fact that we're now in a situation where only like 1 in 3 medical graduates in this country is getting um a doctor job.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I've heard that like a lot of medical graduates end up like Uber drivers or something like that. I think I saw uh, a thing about
Mm.
that. Yeah. It's like
Um,
training people up to not even have the places, but still not. I don't know. It's just
yeah,
fund the
yeah,
NHS. What's going on? Uh,
yeah. So there we go. But in Arcadia,
yeah.
they've got sufficient doctors that they can penalise Hannah, who obviously was already considered, because she was on her fake score, to be rather more trouble than she was worth, as she goes on to prove. But yeah, sorry, you were saying she is treating this kid.
Yes, she's treating this kid, and it's like the fourth time he's come in on the grounds that he's broken a leg, and she's like, "Has this not been flagged up before with this mother?" She's like, "No, is there something wrong?"
Mm,
She basically talks to the like the head nurse at the
mm,
hospital, who says the mother's score is too low for the
mm.
child to be considered. Oh, but I think to for the child to be considered like worth
Yeah.
investigating further, the case being investigated further. Um, which again is like how I think even we see this with Peter, who gets deported. His family is affected
Mm,
by his actions, even
mm,
despite there's no evidence showing that they knew anything about the
mm.
crime that he was committing. And now it's like even though a child is affected based on your parents' score, even though I think in they mention in the series how your score doesn't count until you turn 18 as a child. I think there's like a bus
Yes,
stop
there's certainly
advert
there is a
saying,
there is a there's a yeah, it does it you don't it doesn't actually affect you until you're in your teens or something. Yeah. But yeah,
yeah,
you're right. It's done on the parents thing, which of course is another sort of real reflection of the actual facts of meritocracy. The situation of your parents affects the likely outcome for your
yeah,
life. And obviously there are exceptions, people who, manage to achieve things in spite of the start that they get in life. But the simple,
yes.
fact is that the situation your parents find
Mm.
themselves in is going to affect the education and so on that you have. And that's just been like hammered home as a truth the moment they say, well, we're not going to treat your kid. But it does remind me of like evidence in like teaching, for example, where I might have talked about this book before as well. There's a amazing book called Boys Don't Try, which is looking at the education, particularly of boys in the UK, but also looking at the way in which kind of like teacher bias and subconscious kind of behaviors from teachers will feed into the way in which a child does or doesn't achieve their potential. As one of the things this kind of covers. And it's basically looking at the fact that the subconscious racism, for example, from teachers will play into the way in which they'll effectively mark the work of children of colour um, at a lower level than that of their white counterparts, or the opportunities that they will offer will be based on kind of like a pre-existing biased view of the kids. So there you've already got a place where you're basically saying, oh, everybody's got the same access to education in this classroom and so on, but they don't.
Mhm.
So there's very much the same, I guess, idea that something about them, and it would play out not just in race, but in the kind of like, oh, well, your parents are clearly thick, or not our kind of people, or whatever. And also, of course, this idea that the mother isn't pushy about it, which again often has something to do with kind of like powerlessness in terms of lack of voice, feeling that you can't stand up to professionals because you don't feel like you can argue on the same level as them or whatever, which is a problem. So Hannah, little revolutionary that she is, tries to get him in for a bone scan on the grounds that no one will know because he's still a
Mm.
kid. But one of the things about Arcadia is it's very hard to get away with doing anything like that
Yes.
because
Well, they live in a surveillance state.
yes, they do indeed. Yeah.
So yeah, so she gets caught again by this head nurse, and it's that kind of collective punishment seems to
Mm,
be a aspect of
mm,
the society of Arcadia.
mm.
So she's basically like, if you do this, then we're all going to be held responsible, and I'm going to have to report you. Yeah, even though technically, I
Nora,
think
such a hypocrite,
I know
though.
Nora's such a hypocrite because we later
Yeah.
find out she's been stealing medication for a man who seems to be very important in this case of working
Mm,
out the people behind this terrorist attack in the
yeah.
dome mentioned earlier. But yeah, he is getting an illegal kidney transplant. He's a
Mm,
man who has been ill for a long time, so his score is too
mm,
low to be deemed worth, his cost is not worth his
mm.
benefit. Well, it kind of all comes back to again that a sort of like negative feedback loop of like once your score is
Yes.
low, you're not going to be able
Yeah.
to bring it back. So people,
Mm,
people who are disproportionately affected, who can't work,
mm,
like people who have care responsibilities or who are
mm,
disabled themselves, such as Marco's dad, Simon, who
mm.
like breaks his collarbone, is
Yeah,
unable to
that's right.
work, loses his job, unable to find another job. And obviously
Yeah,
Percy
like
as well.
once one thing has happened, it's almost impossible unless somebody else can step in and help you, but then their own school will be affected by that. So they're disincentivized from doing that. As you say, yeah, Kaz, somebody with on a really horrific, like home jerry-rigged dialysis
Yeah,
machine because he doesn't even have access to dialysis care. But, obviously, as you say, not able to work, score goes down. And we see it with
yes.
Kato, is like it's manipulated to some extent because we're told that, she gets the
Mm-hmm.
fake alcohol thing, but she loses her job because of Peter and the score reduction.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then she tries to go to
And
like
yeah,
the score
well, she
support
she
place.
gives up her the possibility of her keeping her job for her daughter.
Yeah.
Um, so it's kind of like
Mm,
sacrificing herself for
mm,
which I guess also I maybe illustrates a point about like the privilege of having children is it is
mm.
kind of like you have to have like a certain amount of like financial stability,
Yeah.
and
And they have to have a certain number of points, I think, to have more
points, yeah, to have
children.
more
Yeah.
children. But also just like access to support and care
Mm,
for young kids. So you can't,
mhm.
be taking time out of. I don't know. I wonder how the maternity leave situation works in maternity and paternity
Well,
leave
exactly. Yeah.
works in
Yeah.
Arcadia.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, you're right. And I guess with Kato, we see the thing on the like her score goes down. She then tries to go and get the support for like people who need to get their score
Sort of
back
like
up.
the job center
Yeah, the
basically
job
for
center,
people with
exactly.
low
Yeah.
scores. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, and then we get the bus thing.
Yeah, we got the bus thing. Kato is unable to get to the job center because as she's attempting to get there, she is basically removed from the bus in order to give her seat up to someone with a higher score.
Mm,
She's not entitled to a place on the bus.
mm,
Um, So even, she with even with the intention that she had to try and raise her score,
Mm,
she like faces barriers to
mm.
being able to do that.
Yeah.
So it's just like
Very
continuing
similar
like,
to the idea that,
yeah,
oh, apply for these jobs, go to these job interviews, get yourself a job, but how are you paying for the transport to get there, or the
yeah,
the big up to places like Timpson's that will dry clean your suit for free if you're unemployed and going for a job interview, but
yeah,
you've got
sort of like
got all the
reinforcing
costs.
inequality.
Exactly,
Um,
yeah, yeah. And as he sort of said, there's this whole thing about like people, there is no incentive for people, it seems, to help one another within the
yeah,
family. To some degree there is, as you say, although it's questionable, I think, whether Cato did the right thing by giving the
the
one job available to
yeah,
Lutz, because Lutz is not, well, there's no accommodations and the job is completely inappropriate
yeah.
for her.
And also just there's no safeguarding as well. There's like she
I
was
know.
suffering
Oh
like
God. Yeah.
sexual abuse and intimidation at her work. And there was
Yeah.
it's such an individualistic society that no one bothered to report that. There was like a whole room of people watching it take place. And
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
And
wasn't that such a classic case of, oh, it's just a bit of banter,
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
like, but
Yeah. And I think like it's something like Marco says right at the end of the series that it's like we live in like an every man for himself sort
mm,
of like
yeah,
society.
yeah,
Um
absolutely. And I think that there's sort of the active thing, like report on your neighbors if you see crime, you're, or like something, that's not right. You're supposed to be telling people, much like, things like with the Stasi, for example. I think that was quite an influence on this, the idea of the sort of secret police that thrives on turning neighbors against neighbors, and that sort of thing. That's very much a part of it. Um, but then obviously we're also, sort of constantly dealing with this thing that, well, everybody must do their part in society. And I think you hear this so much with the people like who criticize a benefit system because I'm working hard and other people are sitting around and doing nothing. Like that's their choice, rather than understanding the sort of like reasons why you need a system where nobody is left behind, as it were.
mm,
Um, I wondered with Lutz whether we're sort of told that, well, no, we're told that she had this job at basically like doing the tech side of the algorithm. Um,
mm,
and she loses it because of like the points thing, but also because she's kind of accused of nepotism, which she doesn't really understand because she's like, I applied for the job and then I got the job. Um, but there's part of me that was thinking, well, it's a tricky one because in this situation, clearly she had the skill set to do this very advanced tech job because you couldn't fake that kind of thing. It's not just like,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not like, giving your kid a job and they just float around in the office all day like Patrick Bateman or somebody like that. So going back to things we talked about in the past. But there was also that sort of sense that she wasn't easily employable despite her skill set because of the fact that she's very literal, for example. So she's
mm,
told every call must be dealt with within like 2 minutes. She's like, your time is up, goodbye.
yeah,
um, you know Unable to sort of see the sort of nuance of that, even though she's obviously capable in other ways. And also she struggles very much with the change that's involved. Did you get the impression that the housing system is basically like, we have this many houses and people who are important and have high scores go in this big house,
yeah.
and people who are not go in this kind of Soviet era kind of
Yeah, yeah.
slash
I guess again,
slash
it
council
kind of comes,
house kind of place?
yeah, like it kind of comes back to that like meritocracy system where it's like,
Mm,
oh, the people with the higher scores deserve the big house, whilst the
mm,
people with the lower
yeah.
scores. Yeah, I mean, I don't, yeah, which also seems kind of a bit of, like funny. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I got that definitely.
I mean, on the plus side, it seemed to be a system where everybody was being housed. Oh, except for the people they chucked out to die in the
Yeah,
wilderness, obviously. But like,
yeah,
that's a really kind of like promising sort of way of looking at things, meeting people's basic needs. But you say rather than having like the luxurious houses and the very basic houses.
Yeah.
You could have
I
a
guess
society where, although I suppose when you've had societies where everybody's been supplied with housing by the state, like in sort of the USSR and things like
mm,
that, not not great, the sort of living conditions in which people
yeah, but it's
existed.
interesting they put like housing above like as a right above medical care as a right.
Mm.
Is like
That's
I
true, unless I suppose it's like everyone's entitled to the very basic of medical care up to a certain point. The
up
kid
to
who
a certain
comes in
point.
with his
Yeah,
broken leg, he gets a cast. He just doesn't
yeah,
get any kind of like long-term treatment. I also think there's something about the fact that they rely so much on the idea that the score is something very public, that everybody cares about everyone's scores. Like even down to the bus stops being like different, you had to stand in a different bit depending on your
yeah.
kind of score. So everyone's constantly like
It's
publicly
like
aware.
in a sense like class segregation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess it's
I
the
guess
same with
like people's like social approaches to each other. I don't know if we see it that much in the show, but like the way that they're separated probably indicates like there
mm.
must be some level of that.
And well, like Alex, the whole sort of story starts with Alex's engagement party to Gloria, but after Alex's score is knocked down, she's no longer eligible to marry Gloria because one person with a lower score can't marry somebody with a higher score. I mean, it's worth talking a little bit about like how these different kind of characters react to a recognition of kind of both what their father's done, but also kind of like a burgeoning recognition of how problematic the system is. Like it took a wake up call, like their privilege being like undermined for them to see this. But there's like Millie is the one who goes out and looks for her father in the
Yes.
wilderness. Hannah tries to do, I guess, her what she feels like her medical duty to people at the hospital, regardless of whether they can pay or not. And she gets involved with the unfaithfuls.
Unfaithfuls, yeah.
Mhm. Lutz gets very pleased when she loses her job and can go and do other fun things. But also a lot of the story with her is about kind of like how she tries to understand how she fits in with other people in society,
Yeah.
like what is it to make a friend and things like that. And Alex basically agrees to inform on her father-in-law to be and hide secrets from her fiance and record her family. And well, you said you thought she was very up and down as a character.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I feel like Alex's psyche is probably like the most interesting to analyze throughout the
Mhm.
show. Because I think when the sort of fallout happens, the score fraud, she at first turns against her family, sort of like realize like seeing how much this like collective punishment has affected her, has ruined her chances of marriage and her position at work
Mm.
is affected. And that like almost leads her to betraying her family by trying to like provide evidence to the enforcers uh the police basically
Mm.
of the rest of her family's involvement in the fraud
Mm.
and then she ends up being blackmailed and wanting
Mm.
to protect her family and taking trying to also take advantage of her position within
Mm.
sort of acting as a spy against
Yeah,
her own fiance's
yeah,
father, but then ruins her own marriage in the process.
yeah, because she contributes to framing him essentially, doesn't
Yeah,
she, in the end?
um,
I mean, I think that with her, there's something about the fact that she's sort of like constantly sort of trying to renegotiate her relationship with her family. Like,
mm,
she's appalled. I guess she, as a member of the Shield, a police officer, she's a kind of
yes,
appalled at her father's crime, but also then realizes that, like,
the system's
practically
very
everyone else
broken.
knew about it,
Yeah,
and
practically, yeah.
yeah, and then yeah, as you say, she starts to realize as her mother is kind of persecuted that there's a manipulation of the system. Um,
Yeah, and then like Peter wasn't the only one that was like trying
Precisely,
to
yeah.
bend that to his
Yeah.
advantage.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like reckoning both with like the crimes that her family has
Mm.
committed, but also like her place within the police force and how she
Yeah,
acts as an
absolutely.
agent of like
Yeah.
enforcing this like unfair system.
And one of the things I think it does deal with quite well is this idea of like your allegiance to your family versus your allegiance to the state.
mm,
Um, but I've got really mixed views on this because it comes up a lot in kind of TV dramas where people are like, family first and things like that. You know, they sort of, oh yes, well, we know that my son murdered loads of people, but he's my son, so we're not going to help the police to put him away or whatever
yeah,
because
we can cover it up.
family. This is like, really? Um, I have a problem with that. I think that there is a sort of there's a point at which your social obligation, and possibly your obligation to your mass murdering child in that particular scenario, is that you should cooperate with law enforcement. But
Yeah,
in other situations, we hear a lot about this idea that, that is particularly horrifying that Alex kind of would try and betray her family. And then I think a lot of what she does after that is about like guilt. Um,
yeah,
but Marco is the other one who has a really interesting relationship with his family, both Simons, excellent,
yes.
excellent name, his father, but also it's his nephew, isn't it? The one with Down's syndrome who is been kicked out.
Yes.
Yes. So I
So
just
it's Marco's sister who has um a noble
Noble, yes, that's right.
yeah, noble, the boy with Down syndrome. Yeah, she basically, again, it's like another example where she sacrificed her own
Mm,
score to try and make sure he
mm,
um was able to maintain his, and then
mm.
she gets kicked out, and then Noble gets kicked out. I don't know. No, that's not right. That's what happens. I think what so Marco prioritizes his father
That's right.
over
Yeah.
Noble, as
Yeah.
again kind of like how with um the organ transplant is kind of
Mm,
that like who's gonna make the most of this
mm.
opportunity, or who's
Yeah,
gonna
exactly. He sort of like just applies the rules of the system within his
mm,
own house. And this is because, as you say, this the Nobel's mother, this Marco's sister, has been unable to care for her son and also maintain her own score.
mm,
Then Nobel is cared for by his grandfather and uncle, but the work that he is able to do, which is basically packaging, doing boxes, creating boxes, that he and Simon can do together. I guess the points for doing that work would be shared out between the two of them.
yeah,
But Marco submits them all as Simon in this sort of idea that it won't be enough for either of them. So you have to make a choice, essentially.
yeah,
But that's, ultimately, obviously, we have the sort of ableist idea of it versus the kind of like utilitarian sort of thing, this many resources, this many people making a choice. But we learn, of course, that Noble has in fact been saved by Ren, who is his mother's surviving boyfriend, who has basically kind of like, I guess, traded for his protection in the outside
yes,
world, which
yeah,
might lead us nicely onto the settlement and what we thought of that. Because although the outside world is full of crazy barbarians, there is also one sort of long-standing settlement
settlement,
led by a
yes,
guy called Dax, who we learn
yes,
is the first soldier ever to have,
rejected
um,
the
yeah,
system, sort
exactly,
of
basically
refused
refused
to
to,
kick people out into the wilderness.
yeah,
Yeah, and as a result, he is also
mm,
deported. Um,
yeah,
yeah, it's an interesting settlement because it's sort of I think it's in contrast to Dax is like the primary leader
mm,
of the settlement. You could sort of call it like I guess in essence a bit of a dictatorship. I think it's like by his word everything operates. He chooses who stays and who
mm,
goes, and his word is final. Versus in Arcadia where there's the score system,
mm,
which you could consider to be more objective. But Yeah, I don't know. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a really nice parallel in the way that like they're both walled societies. The settlement is obviously much smaller. It's made up of kind of like, I guess, much cruder in its design, whereas Arcadia is this kind of very stone, solid, brutalist architecture. Kind of retro-futuristic look to it. Looks very much like your kind of like authoritarian
Yeah.
thing. But obviously, what we see is that, yeah, on the one hand, you're right, Dax pretty much holds power through the force of his own character. But within that, there's obviously greater flexibility for, I guess, more than just a sort of what can you contribute versus what will you cost us.
Mm.
Although there is a certain amount of that, because like with Nobel, Ren has to provide certain resources to the settlement in return
Yeah.
for Noble being able to stay there. But like when Peter turns up, Millie tries to make the same kind of deal. But
Mm.
actually, Peter is able to contribute a great deal
On his own
himself, you
accord,
know?
yeah.
Yeah. And
He like goes about fixing the solar panels, like trying to provide
exactly.
power.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think that if, like, in many ways, Dax is very short-sighted in terms of how he perceives people's
mm,
ability to contribute. Although he also has some form of empathy, I think.
yeah. I think he's able to, even though it could be like more biased, I think he's
Mm,
able to extend a like
mm,
sympathy to an
mm.
individual situation,
Yeah.
like which like accounts for the consequences a bit more, whereas
Mm,
Score that in the way that it's set up in Arcadia
mm.
can't. Um,
And I
but
suppose it
yeah,
also
I don't
comes
know.
down to this idea of like, well, Dax seems to be a leader who, yes, we might not have sort of like a democratic election system or something like that, but what we do seem to have is kind of like people's respect and acceptance of him because he is
Mm,
challenged by the younger men
yeah,
in the group and so on, but he maintains like his power. So there's a little bit of sort of
yeah,
like a I guess an accepted dictator or like a somebody who is recognized as being sufficiently benevolent as a dictator
yeah,
to be
yeah.
worthwhile. Whereas like it's the falseness, I think, of the system in Arcadia, the idea
Mm,
that it's supposed to be equitable. But actually when you start looking at the power kind of above it, that it ceases to be so. The other thing that I think is different is that Dax kind of like sticks by his commitments, whereas one of the things with Arcadia that's really problematic is the fact that the minimum score keeps
is yeah,
rising.
moving like yeah, the goalpost kind of keeps moving.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, did you have any thoughts about that? Because it felt to me like that was quite like I don't know, current in the idea of sort of like how you deserve to become like a resident of a certain country or something like that. That
yeah. I read the news recently about all migrants have to have an A level in English.
exactly, yeah.
Which by the way, no one, well, not no one, but most people in the country don't have a bloody A level in
No,
English. Barely an A
exactly.
level
And
in fucking
couldn't
a GCSE A
see. We
level,
have enough. Yeah, we
GCSE
have
English.
enough problems getting people to get their four in GCSE English and
Yeah,
maths.
yeah.
No, it's bizarre.
Um,
I mean, I have an A level in English many years ago, English literature, and I enjoyed it very much indeed. But I'm not sure how much it contributes to my
just
sort of
yeah,
contributions to society when I talk about the Tempest, it's
yeah.
sort of like,
You
analyze this
know,
poem.
doesn't really affect your ability to pay taxes
No,
or,
no. But you're right, it's exactly things like that. And also stuff like, so I've got friends who've got indefinite leave to remain. So they treat Britain as their home. They're, long-term workers and taxpayers in this country, but will now need to will possibly need to apply for British citizenship, which may mean giving up their citizenship of another country,
yeah.
because
So dishing out like £1,500 something, just pocket change, to be honest, obviously.
good
Um,
point, very good point.
yeah, just I don't know.
Um,
Yeah.
or the idea of like changing the rules about who can bring their spouses over. So if somebody's come
Yeah.
over here to work and on the assumption they'll be able to bring their spouse, and then that's changed. So yeah, I think this idea that obviously there's arguments for sort of, changes of circumstance, things like that, Brexit and stuff has affected things. But this idea that people who are already living somewhere are suddenly told, oh, no, you don't meet those criteria. Well, that's basically what Arcadia is. It's sort of saying, oh, yes, you thought that you were okay with your 3.5, but actually now that's going to be below the score because we're going to put it up. Yeah, that feels to me to be one of the most distinctly unfair things about
Yeah, and I think also
the
the nature
system.
of the score doesn't allow any sort of safety net when people
Mm.
do have, various
Mm.
problem, like
Yeah,
go through various issues, like temporary issues in
might be
life. It's like
temporary issues,
one and
exactly.
done. You've
Yeah,
dropped below it. You're out. You're on your
good.
own.
Yeah, good
There's
point. Yeah.
no there's no sort of long term
Mm.
foresight to seeing
Mm.
that even if someone isn't contributing to your
Mm.
society, this very present point that they couldn't
Mm.
do so far into the future, or you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
um, or some of our greatest innovators and
Mm.
thinkers were people uh who were autistic
Hmm.
or had various other
Mm.
disabilities that
Yeah.
couldn't fit into
Mm.
the, I guess, how society was set up,
Yeah.
um but ended up contributing a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Um,
suppose the other thing to say is that, well, if you cannot contribute anything at all to society,
does that make you in not deserving of
that's
a
yeah,
life
that's
or a
sort of that's
place?
where we
Yeah,
get
yeah.
into basically, it's a sort of
Like you,
form of
well,
eugenics.
yeah,
It's basically
eugenics.
saying,
Yeah.
and in many ways that's what, Arcadia is subtly saying,
Mm,
because they don't believe that anyone survives outside. So, you're out
yeah.
and therefore you're dead essentially.
Yeah, yeah. And there's
Um
no form, if you commit a crime, there is no reform. There is no,
no,
that
also
is,
true.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
guess that if your points are docked, then you can kind of work back up from that. But
yeah.
most crimes, as you say, don't seem to
It's a
have.
death sentence. You've just
Yeah,
death sentenced anyone
yeah,
ever who committed any
yeah,
crime.
yeah.
Um,
Which, again, I suppose if we compare it to ideas around who is allowed to stay in Britain, for example, one of the media's favourite topics of the moment because of all of the hateful nonsense that's being spouted around. But the idea that if you are somebody who has come to seek asylum in this country, of the sort of whatever it is, 70% of asylum seekers who get refugee status gain asylum. I think it might be slightly more than that after appeal. And then you've got people like Reform basically saying, oh no, we're going to not allow any asylum seekers, which I think is going to be illegal, internationally illegal. But the idea that you would send them back, I think that people forget that that is a death sentence, not
yeah.
necessarily for every single one, but if you're somebody who has escaped from a particular regime, if you're one of the people that the British and Americans failed to fulfill their promises to in Afghanistan and you get sent back, or if you're a woman who has escaped from Iraq, um, or a gay person who has escaped from somewhere where they have the death penalty for homosexuality, sending somebody out is a death sentence or a potential
Yeah.
death sentence. And I thought that the Arcadia thing, where they're just like throw them out, don't really know what's
Yeah.
out there,
That your problem
that
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly that sort of idea that well, you're not part of our society, so we really don't care what happens to you, was a very kind of like indicative metaphor of putting up walls, I guess.
Mm.
So, anything else that we want to say about this?
I guess what are we've not seen season two, me or Claire,
No.
but we ended on finding out the one of the perpetrators of this terrorist attack was the big top dog of the government, one of the big top dogs.
Yeah,
Can't
one
remember what his
of,
name is.
yeah, yeah,
One
yeah.
of big top dog government,
Mm,
who also commits not one, not two, but three murders in a
mm,
hospital.
mm. Yeah.
Um, what happened to the surveillance state then?
Mm.
It's not even
I guess
it's
again
not even
comes
covered
down
up.
to that
Yeah,
idea that you,
if you're
well,
at the top,
actually, I mean,
then
it's
yeah,
again, this is a real thing that the rules of
that happens. Yeah.
criminality and accountability. I was thinking about this when I was writing a Substack, whenever it was, it's a bit behind, on Terry Pratchett. I've been thinking quite a lot about the depiction of the idea of crime, and particularly I wrote about the character of Vimes, Commander Vimes in the City Watch in the Discworld series, and he grapples a lot with this idea that like if you commit a like what he thinks of as like the little crimes basically, which might include,
Petty
stealing or
theft, yeah.
yeah, or but it might even include like doing something quite bad to like one person or whatever, then you are responsible as an individual. But if you commit a crime that like I don't know, if you as a being a really bad landlord or running unethical work situations or things like that, those are the sort of things where it's basically saying they're almost too big. Even though they're still on a sort of civic level, they're too big to kind of like get punished. So the focus is on, as you say, like this person stealing this thing rather than or this individual. Well, I mean, the war on drugs is very complex. I acknowledge that, but like this individual selling drugs versus like this person who basically, through the avocado trade funds the production of opiates in South America or whatever. There's a lot like more complex sort of ideas, and this is sort of like the Arcadia microcosm of that there are some people who have a power within this system where the crime is almost like invisible because it's too big. There's very active police force and Marco going hell for leather after this one family, and they're like individuals within it, and yet failing to see the fact that he's actually kind of like just almost like a kind of patsy to the whole bigger
Mm.
crime situation. But yeah, anyway, sorry. Guy seems to be, supposed to be on the side of Arcadia, but
Yeah.
actually was part of the bombing.
Part of the
That
bombing, yeah.
I thought it was interesting. I mean, I don't fully grasp what was going on there,
Yeah, or
as
what
we
the
sort of said.
motive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my thought was, do you remember when we did Leave the World Behind? Julia Roberts, yeah, and the idea that one of the best ways to like undermine a country was to cause chaos and like an external enemy by creating a sense of fear, even if that fear came from like the country had created it for itself. And the same is true
yes. Yeah.
in the Hugh Howey silo novels. The idea that you like you blow your country up before someone else can, so that you've already planned to step into the vacuum. And I wondered if it was a bit of that, like arm the terrorists, knowing that you will then be able to seize power within the chaos that has been created, and discredit the terrorists at the same time, because they have now become terrorists, obviously, rather than like revolutionary freedom fighters.
Yeah.
Is that a possible way of looking at
I think
this guy?
so. Definitely,
Mm,
definitely. Um, yeah, just like instilling fear as like part of a
mm,
control mechanism. And
mm.
it's all about that kind of like community self-reporting, um, having the sort of neighbors against neighbors,
Yeah,
that
exactly. And
sort
I
of
think that
self-policing.
when you've
Um,
got a very small kind of like powerful group within the structure, which is kind of like we don't see the very like top people, but we sort of see the like machinations of the sort of second to top tier,
yeah,
who actually want, they want to be able to pass decisions like raising the minimum score, changing the way the algorithm works without having their opponents get in the way. So I guess it's all part of that. Um, Plus, of course, when you have a state that maybe people are starting to question, like, is this really a great system? This whole score thing. Well, if you create a different enemy, this sounds very familiar again in Britain at the moment. Instead of looking at our actual problems, let's create an artificial enemy um, that we can talk about in all the news, even though it's not actually relevant. But the idea that, yeah, you can distract people from the actual problems before they start rioting against the things that are actually affecting them. I thought the one last thing that I thought would be just nice to mention was the fact that Lutz is the only character who doesn't. acknowledge her score. She doesn't even necessarily know what it
No.
is at any particular time. She's more interested in like when she's worried about, or when they're worried that she's going to be cast out, banished. She's like, oh, what's like some bird that she's never seen, but she thinks that
Yes.
might still
Yeah.
exist in the wild. Just like really kind of like a sense of wonder at the world without adhering to the expectations that are put upon her. I thought that was
Yeah.
quite nice.
That was
And she
very
makes
nice.
a friend in
Yeah.
Simon
Slash more
Simons.
than a friend at the end. We
Yeah,
don't
maybe,
know.
maybe, yeah,
I
yeah.
did find it a little bit weird. I feel like the way, and I think this happens a lot with characters who are autistic,
Mm,
often
mm.
get kind of infantilized at like some level. And I
Yes,
do
I think
think the
there is
like
that.
power
Yeah.
dynamic between the Marco
Marco.
and
Mm.
it's it did feel
It,
a bit like
yeah.
on different levels, especially with her comparison to Marco's nephew, the sort of like parallel made
Yeah,
between them
that's a
by
very good
Simon
point. Yeah.
Simmons.
Um,
Yeah, I don't know. I was a little bit like, okay,
it's certainly a
yeah,
very uncomfortable sort of direction for it,
they're
like
taking
a
it in.
relationship to go in because
Yeah,
of the problems in the power dynamic.
yeah, yeah.
And just because, Marco's got a long way to go before he becomes remotely like kind of like
It's
okay
yeah,
as a person,
acceptable. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Um,
But he's
but
taken a step in the right direction, I think.
yes,
He
I think so. Yeah. A lot of what Marco obviously feels is like self-loathing because he had made this terrible decision with regard to Noble, and
yes,
then he's basically being told that he kind of like did it to pander to a system that he's slowly realizing is like massively flawed. And
yeah,
people do that, don't they? They like double down on their decisions because they don't want to feel like they did the wrong thing
yeah.
based in what they were being told was the right thing to do. And I get that. So there's a second season. Dear Dutch and Belgian listeners, of whom I'm sure we have many, 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 please do let us know what happens in season two, um, which we will watch in due course when it makes its way. I think it is due to be out in on Channel 4 as well at some point. But a little bit of an obscure one. It is, in Dutch, but we definitely, yeah, I
Yeah, we love a
recommend
good
it.
something a little
Yeah,
international.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, nice. It's got a lot of layers, a
it
lot of
does
complexity, and I just think aesthetically very
as
impressive.
well. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
as you were
Uh,
saying, that it was like the most
it's like the
expensive
most high
low
budget,
countries. Yeah,
yeah,
um,
production. So
yeah,
I think they did a pretty good job with that, I'd
yeah,
say. Yeah.
yeah. So, yep. So go check it out. If you, well, you'll need to after our discussion of it if you want to know
Yes.
what really happens, because it's too complicated. We have been a little bit up and down with
Yeah.
beginning of the semester and then the beginning of like lurgy season and
Yeah.
that
And
sort of
winter,
thing. But
terrible,
exactly.
terrible times. Um,
But we'll try and get back onto things. But I think that
yes.
we are hoping to do an episode on flow,
Hmm.
the award-winning animation about a cat.
In a
That is it,
post-apocalyptic world.
that's
We're gonna
right.
watch it
That's
and see if there's much to
yeah,
talk about.
yeah.
Maybe we could
Um,
combine it with another sort of
Another
similar.
post-apocalyptic story about a
Yeah, we'll
cat.
see. We'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see. We'll do some
I know one
research.
about a dog actually. There's a
Really?
novel. Yeah, there's a novel about
Oh,
the
sorry.
last dog in the world or something. Okay, so
Yeah.
we will be back with something soon. Check out our Substack as well. Trying
Yes.
again to keep that fortnightly, but we've missed one or two. But you can see that most recent one looking at why dystopian fiction lovers should read the Discworld novels. And there will be more, doubtless, to talk about soon. But you can catch up with that by following us on Instagram, where we will point things out, following us on Substack, following us on Blue Sky, Dystopian Fiction, Current Affairs, or by going to our website, where you can also buy yourself, should you wish, a very nice Dystopian Fiction, Current Affairs hoodie or similar. I am actually wearing a t-shirt, but you can't see it because
Hell
first
yeah.
of all, this is an audio format, and secondly, I have a big jumper on because it's like 12 degrees or something
You'll just
in
have
my
to
house.
imagine it or look it up on our
That's right.
website.
Yeah,
And the
check it
full
out.
dystopian fiction has been moved to current affairs. Tracksuit set will be coming up
That's
soon.
right. Marsha's
It's
very
on my
keen on
to-do
this.
list. Get your
Yeah,
Christmas
yeah.
shopping done soon. Get your Christmas shopping done
That's
soon.
right. Yeah, check it all out. Support what we do. We try to keep it all free, but the more the merrier in the branded tracksuit would be good. Um, so thank you very much, Marsha.
Thank you very much, Claire.
Goodbye, listeners.
Bye.